Good afternoon, or good morning, or good evening, depending on where in the world you are. I want to welcome you on behalf of Greenbook. My name is Dana Stanley, and right now we're going to have an illustrious panel of brand side insight leaders called Brands Unite to Disrupt the Status Quo of Data Quality. In leading that discussion are two people, Ms. Bonnie Breslauer, Chief Customer Officer of Disco, and Mary Beth Weber, founder of CASE and advocate for Lucy. So without further ado, Mary Beth and Bonnie.
Thanks so much for attending this panel discussion today. Let me just get this started here. We're excited for you to be here for Disrupting the Status Quo of Data Quality. I'm Mary Beth Weber. I've spent a number of years on the supplier side of marketing research and intelligence before devoting the last 2 decades working on behalf of client-side researchers such as Unilever, Kraft, Mondelez, Hershey, and Johnson & Johnson to ensure compliance to research data quality standards. CASE was created on behalf of client-side researchers who were frustrated by the impact of sampling quality on their ability to obtain valid and reliable findings. We had an in-person kickoff meeting back in 2018, and that involved very, very candid and eye-opening discussions between client-side researchers and C-level decision makers from across the research supply chain. The stars aligned earlier this year when a long-term supporter of CASE, Melanie Courtright, I'm sure many of you know her, she became CEO of the Insights Association, and Kirti Singh, he's the Chief Analytics and Insights Officer at P&G. He offered to help raise visibility and engagement across his peers and the industry, including the ARF. Another momentum builder for CASE has been Tia Maurer. She's a 22-year research veteran in R&D at P&G. Tia has co-presented with CASE several times this year to help raise visibility of issues by presenting her findings and real-life examples on how bad data is misinforming business decisions. I also want to thank and acknowledge our very esteemed panelists. Without their ongoing support and outward advocacy, you would not be joining us today to learn more. These are, I forgot to even switch my slides around. So these are some of the initiatives that CASE is currently undertaking through partnerships with the Insights Association, the ARF, and industry thought leaders. One of those initiatives involves a research on research analysis of the effectiveness of commercially available fraud detection capabilities. The goal here is that we want to provide some recommendations and guidelines to the industry in terms of which features seem to be the most effective against fraud. In addition, we're working closely with the Insights Association and SMR as they rewrite and update the SMR 28 questions. CASE's role will be to advocate that there is third-party verification of the provider answers to those questions regarding their purported data quality processes. Well, I don't want to delay our highly anticipated panel discussion any longer. Here's Bonnie Breslauer. She's the Chief Customer Officer at Disco. And Bonnie is a pioneer in online research. She's been a valued partner to the CASE data quality effort since its inception. Bonnie?
Yeah, thanks so much, Mary Beth, and good afternoon, everyone. I definitely share Mary Beth's passion for data quality through a long history as well. Prior to joining Disco about 3 years ago, I spent 16 years at Lightspeed and Kantar, overseeing Kantar's online data collection, including the procurement of sample. I'm intimately familiar with the sample landscape and unfortunately with the degradation of data quality that has plagued the industry and gotten worse over the years in so many cases. While many factors impact data quality, the integrity of research participants, what we call sample, is at the top of that list. Bots, click farms, inattentive research participants all contribute to the industry's woes in way too many cases. So what's going on? The aggregation of sample sources has reached new heights. New sample sources have proliferated. Many are simply monetized traffic. Most researchers refer to all sample sources as panel, but in reality, there are very few true research panels left. And let's face it, the life of the research respondent is not easy. They are still subjected to long, poorly designed surveys, meager incentives, and disqualification after investing significant amounts of time. And let me be the first one probably to tell you that our research respondents are being treated even worse during this pandemic. There's a lot of pricing compression, and they're very busy and they're stressed out. And because of all of these issues and the pricing compression, they're facing even lower incentives than they were before. We've talked about data quality issues as an industry for years. How can we solve for this? Or to quote our esteemed panelists from Forward, Will, are the only winners going to be the cheaters and the bots? Let's hope that is not the case, right? And hope is not a strategy. Our panelists have strong views. Let's start with brief introductions, and then we'll kick off the panel. Michael, do you want to get us started?
Sure. Thank you, Bonnie, and thanks, Mary Beth, as well. So I'm Michael Lancor. I lead our Analytics and Insights Accelerator organization at P&G, which works across all of our businesses to ensure we have leading edge tools, best practices, and expertise needed to make sure that analytics and insights at P&G is a competitive advantage. I've worked with P&G now for 28 years, all of it in consumer research, so I have a lot of passion for the profession, as well as this topic, which is a key reason why I'm a returning panelist.
Thanks, Michael. Will?
I'm Will Neafsey. I run a team at Ford that does consumer insights and analytics. So it's an interesting blend of a traditional market research team with kind of an analytics team also. And so we serve the entire marketing community by sort of bringing together those two ideas while still staying true to a lot of the true market research roots that we have. So similar to Michael, I've spent 28 years in the same place. Most of which in market research, although I do have 5 years on the plant floor. So if you ever want to know how to swear properly, I can help you out.
Thanks, Will. Charles?
Hi, I'm Charles Guilbeau, and I have the Consumer and Shopper Understanding at Ferrero North America. Ferrero probably is not a name as familiar to you as Ford or Procter Gamble, but we make some of the world's most beloved brands like Nutella, Tic Tac, Ferrero Rocher, and Kinder Chocolate. I've had a passion for this topic for quite some time because I've seen a really visible decline in the quality of research from across my career, from pretty high quality before the internet, and then kind of shaky at the early days of the internet, then beginning to stabilize. But now I'm seeing it degrading for a number of reasons that we'll probably cover in today's discussion.
Great, Charles. Thanks. And Andy?
I don't know if Andy was able to come in, so I told him to reboot again.
We're having technical issues. Resolved. Okay, well, while we're waiting, Andy is with Flowers Foods, and so he's also a returning panelist like Michael, so we're hoping that he'll be able to log in here momentarily. Okay, so we'll get started. As we, before we jump into the meat of the conversation, let's just frame the issue. If everybody could just, in a rapid fire format, tell us what drives your trust, or should I say mistrust in research results? What does data quality mean to you? Charles, you want to kick us off?
Well, sure. I mean, you think about the fundamentals of marketing research is in drawing a representative statistical sample of the population, which was pretty easy back in the day when you could do a random digit dialing, or even what sometimes the census does today. But what's happened is representation sometimes only means demographics today and not the psychographics. And if you think about it, if you pull all of your respondents from locations on the web where they're seeking discounts, it's going to be a different mindset than the average consumer. So we really have to look at both the representation of the population, both demographically and psychographically.
Great, got it. Thanks. Will?
I think, mistrust is probably where we start. So, frankly, anytime we get research these days, kind of our first, unfortunately, our first inclination is just that, don't believe it. And so we run through a series of data checks, even kind of post-panel, post-primary supplier, to make sure that it's valid. And one of the benefits of the auto industry is we know what to expect. There are pretty stable rates of, we know exactly how many of every kind of vehicle was sold. We know what ages to expect. We know what geographies to expect in most countries. Some countries are a little flaky, but so yeah, mistrust is where we start.
So do you find, Will, that people are coming in who are just not who they say they are? They're just giving false information, or what do you see the most?
I mean, with the exception of the bots, they're just giving false information. I mean, if in an improperly worded screener, people key in on, a car. Yeah, I'll just say I bought a new one. I mean, you can fake your way through it between whether you own a really old car and a really new car. You could probably get your way through the screener.
Yeah, we hear you. Okay, thanks. Michael? Oh,
I think you're on mute, Michael.
yeah, let me make sure. Let me see that it's not.
Michael, I think, did you go on mute?
Am I back?
Oh, there you go. Now you're back.
Great.
Here's Michael.
No trouble at all. Thanks. No, I think, from my end, when I think about data quality, one of the things I, always think about is kind of truth seeking, which is what I think that we, are really intent on doing, I think, from a profession standpoint. And, I think anytime we have something that would be an inaccuracy or an incorrect portrayal of the truth, I think that what ends up happening is that, it leads to, in our case, what we've seen is, making wrong choices or bad decisions, either for our company or for consumers. So one of the things I would say, kind of overall is just that I do feel like, data quality is particularly important, not just because of the fact that, we do see bad data quality out there, but also because we also see kind of the consequences or outcomes from when we don't get it right.
Well, this is starting off on a really positive note, which is exactly why we're having this this conversation. And I have to say that, when we were exchanging, conversation, prior to this, it's not unexpected, right? So just to summarize a little bit, we've got the issue of representation, representing the population, and then, really having, people tell the truth, right? Having, honest, accurate depictions of, when they're giving their opinions, right? Okay, so let's take off the gloves. I think it sounds like you're not getting data quality if you're starting to, like Will said, to start with your, you have mistrust coming out of the gate. But let's hear your stories. So I think the audience would be really interested in some of the experiences that you've had in your companies where you've really had just to scrap data. It's been really super frustrating. And, it gets, there have been, as Michael said, there's ramifications, right? Wrong decisions are made, and it's very, very costly. So we'd love to hear about those. Who wants to get us started? Anybody raise your, I'm open. Okay, well, it's yours.
I mean, I'll give you one clear example. I mean, we were doing a study in Brazil a few years ago, and data's coming in, everything's looking okay. We, supplier checked it, double checked it, wrote a report, sent it to us, sent us the data set too, and one of my analysts kept looking at it, going, something's not right. And it probably took a week or two of her kind of running her normal statistical checks, and ultimately found that 50% of the 5,000 records were created by a bot. And so, going back, because there was just something not quite right, and the bots are getting better and better. But, so then now you got to go all the way back and, to the very beginning and say, okay, refield. And now you're 8 weeks behind on your schedule if you're lucky. Plus, sort of the credibility damage, because you've now had to keep telling the business side, sorry, we hired a supplier that got bad data for us. So it's, that's a major example. Obviously, we have, every study we have to go through and do some cleaning on our own. But, those big hits can really kind of hurt your credibility on the inside.
Yeah, and I think you raised a great point in terms of the bots getting more sophisticated, because there are human-like, bots now, and they're hard to detect, and they're in massive numbers, and it takes a lot of work to really be able to identify them. So at least you were able to do it right before the data was out there. Kudos to your team.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Okay, Michael?
Sure. Yeah, sure. I guess, Tia Marr on our team has certainly done, quite a bit of work. As you've probably heard in other presentations, her talk about some of the, decisions that we might have made differently had we, actually gone through and cleaned some of our data in different ways. And so we have internally, I think, documented kind of a number of specific issues, that we've gone back to more systematically fix from that standpoint. But the other thing that I would also say, kind of building a little bit on what Will was talking about, is I do also know a number of business leaders who are very skeptical about data. Because of the fact that, they've seen the results or had a bad experience with something, where they got, kind of wrong information or bad data. And the problem with that, I feel like, is that once somebody, sort of doesn't trust the data, they never trust the data. And I think it becomes a real problem then, not only for, like us, from an organization standpoint, but even from a company standpoint of just making sure, P&G at its heart really is a consumer-driven company, and the role that we play in making sure that consumers are really, recognized or listened to is really critical for us. And so I think it's, really dangerous in our particular case when we've seen, some of these cases where some of our business leaders become skeptical because they don't believe the data they're seeing. So that's, I think, really kind of the core set of things that I think are, really important for making sure that we're really kind of taking this seriously and doing everything we can systematically to solve it.
Right. And I know that there are adjustments that have to be made for that, right, in terms of turning to other methodologies and in some cases. And we'll talk about that, some alternatives that you might be looking at just to get the answers that you're looking for. Mm-hmm. I thought we had Andy, but now I don't think we do.
Well, maybe he could talk. Andy, are you there?
Bonnie, I'm back.
Oh,
the camera's not working, but I'm back.
Andy, the floor is yours. Do you want to do just a quick intro?
So the build on what everyone's saying is I've had one really bad experience, and under the heading of, everyone's trying to be agile, faster, cheaper. Several years ago, we went with the do-it-yourself platform, and we discovered the hard way that people would basically answer questions to get into the surveys. And so we switched platforms to someone who's a little more judicious about their panel quality. But what really worries me is it's great when you can sit there and say, oh my gosh, the data's bad. But how many times can you not tell that the data's bad and you're making bad decisions? Mm-hmm. And I think that's the part we need to explore.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, the click farms have become so sophisticated. There's professional click farm trainers now that are training the click farms. And, it's not just a matter of, they screen in and they can give answers that are really hard. They look real. And so I think for for a researcher going in, combing through that data, if you're not catching and identifying those people, you'll never know that they're really in there. And that's not to put more fear, but that's a really scary scenario. Sorry. I'm passionate about this too. As your moderator. Okay, Charles, I'm going to unleash you because I know you have a lot to say.
Well, I'll keep it short. I mean, I think there's been two major issues I've confronted in the past year. One is fundamentally a shortage of sample. Over time, there's been a bigger demand for research, but at the same time, consumers are less and less willing to participate. So I've certainly run into situations where field timings have been delayed, or it's also quite difficult to get readings in geographic areas, even state capitals that are of a reasonable size. We just don't have the depth of willing respondents that we need overall. So that's the first issue. The second is, when you go into, internet research, it's important, you have to, because of all this other issue, you have to blend people from multiple panels to be able to get an aggregation to meet your sampling needs. That blending has to be done where kind of like diversifying a portfolio where you have balanced people from each so it isn't overly skewed by one panel or the other because the panels are systematically different. And it's a core competence of a third-party research agency to be able to manage that panel blending over time, especially in tracking surveys, so that the panel blend does not affect your results. And I would say in the past year, we've seen a breakdown of that in some cases and had to discard a couple waves of tracking as a result. And that's really just a fundamental competence that needs to be at every single vendor in terms of good management of the blending of the panels.
Yeah, I hear you in terms of blending. So you've talked about I think everybody's talked about your research suppliers. There's a long chain, right, in the supply chain, the value chain in our industry. Who do you all hold accountable? Is it the research suppliers, the sample companies, a combination, yourselves in any way? And that's not to say that it's you. I'm just asking the question. But Charles, do you want to weigh in on that, follow up on your example and give us your thoughts?
To me, it's the person I pay the money to. If I pay them the money, I want them to be fully responsible for the entire value chain. So in our case, we don't do a lot of DIY. We're usually relying on a third-party vendor and do expect them to take full responsibility for every element of quality. And I think in most cases, they're quite willing to do that.
Okay, so it's your research partner, and are they transparent and do they own up to it?
I've had cases in the past where they clearly did not, in fact, probably hid some things, and it took a great deal of effort for them to actually show what we needed to show. That was a few years back. Generally, it's not something that the client wants to get involved in. That's something that we expect them to take care of in their course of doing business. When the client has to get involved in quality, there's a real problem.
Right. Yeah. Go ahead, Michael.
Yeah. I mean, I think a little bit of it kind of just depends on like what the problem is in regards to, who's ultimately responsible. But I do think that, it is a bit of like, we're all in this together kind of thing where, I do feel like, the suppliers certainly need to be taking responsibility to make sure that they are giving, high quality sample and high quality data results. I think in the same token, from a client side, I do think our people need to know, one, what to ask for, and secondly, be willing to engage in the tough conversations that are sometimes needed to get to, what I would consider to be a quality result. And that might mean, kind of saying like, does that mean that I need to, pay something more? Is part of this an issue with how I'm designing my research, et cetera? So again, like I think, just saying that, kind of like, oh yeah, suppliers should solve all of this for us, I don't think is really ultimately going to be, kind of the right solution there. I think it's going to have to be a blend of things that we're doing from a client side and what suppliers are doing. And then the third thing, and I think the reason why we have CASE is because of the fact that, we also need to have industry standards that really, provide, I think, some strong guidelines for really helping, direct some of those decisions as well.
Yeah, that's great feedback. Go ahead, Will.
Yeah, I mean, I would build on what Charles said as far as, ultimately it's the person you write the check to, but I think we've all been in the industry long enough that there's a certain amount of sympathy you feel for the people who you wrote the check to. I mean, so when things go wrong, you know that it wasn't always their fault either. So you try and work with them. The real problem doesn't come to who do I blame, who do I yell at. I mean, that does nothing. It's now I'm 3 weeks behind, and we found a problem, but now I'm short on sample. Now I can't do a cell of millennials or a cell of utility buyers or whatever it may be. Still leaves you with a problem, regardless of where the finger pointing lies.
For the record, I have no sympathy.
Okay, well, in that case, I'm more sympathetic than Charles.
Andy, I want you to weigh in on this too, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, I think I'm closer to Michael's camp. That it takes a village, and my sympathy would lie from the fact that we always want things faster and cheaper. I know when my procurement group then goes and beats the suppliers over the head, they never ask about sample quality when they're negotiating. So I think we're all in this together, and we can't keep saying we want it faster, we want it cheaper, jump through hoops for us, and then expect quality to keep going up. So, I think it's a little bit of everyone starting to work together, having a good dialogue, love about case, and kind of understand where everyone's coming from. So, and I also go back to the ARF FOQ work that was done several years ago. Questionnaire length and a lot of other things have as much, if not a greater impact on quality than sample. So again, I think we're all in this together, and we're going to have to solve it together.
Yeah, I'm glad that you brought that up in terms of the actual, impact of survey design and the length of the survey, because we've been, and having it be mobile friendly. I don't know how many times I've stood up at various conferences in front of the industry and talked about that, and I can't even count the years. It's got to be like 7 or 8 at least, or 9 or 10. I don't know. I'm aging. It's a lot. But I think that's still, it's still an issue where we see it's a combination of factors. So you mentioned the pricing, and I think back in the day, many of us were taught that you could have 2 out of the 3, in terms of faster, cheaper, and quality. But now the expectation is 3 out of 3, and it's been that way, for a long time. So I just want to throw out the question: how do you feel about pricing? Because we've talked about this. We talked about this. Mary Beth remembers. Michael, you were there. Will, you were there many of you were there at our first meeting, face-to-face meeting 2 years ago, where that question was put out in terms of would you pay more for quality, and and maybe you are paying, and maybe that it's just that there's some compression happening in other places, and it's not being passed on. So I don't know. It's just a question. But how do you feel about paying where you're at in terms of budgets and paying for quality?
I can go ahead. I think one of the things that this discussion kind of comes up every year. There's an idea that we're somehow squeezing quality out of the the industry through cost, and I just frankly don't believe it. And what I mean by that specifically is I know as we've gotten more into like DIY research, and I'd give like qualitative research as an example. We're literally paying for that research 10% of what we were paying per respondent before. Most of that is going to the respondent, and we are getting much better quality respondents in doing that research. So, and it's also much faster. So like all of those, I think, are things to say, like when we get it right, I think we can do all of those things. I think one of the things that we have to do though, is to some degree blow up the current models that we have for how research is done. So I do think, like for example, even with panel research, we're starting to see a lot more of things where I think we're seeing kind of more of like software as a service models, where you're, like licensing somebody's platform and then just paying for respondents, et cetera. I think some of those things are very helpful because they actually show where the real costs are, and you basically are paying for, what element of service you desire as part of that. So I think all of those things are really helpful. So I'm a firm believer that you should always be getting, the highest quality and from a pricing and speed standpoint, that it should be also very relatively cheap and also very, very fast. But a lot of that just depends on how you're kind of structuring, or modeling how you're doing kind of the research, if you will.
Yeah, and that's the disintermediation is a great point that you're talking about, where you're really working directly, through some kind of a tool and accessing the respondents directly, right? I mean,
exactly. And it's a good example of, I think, us using the technology to our advantage versus, I think we've talked about some of the downsides of technology, like the bots and, some of those other things. But I think it's an incumbent on us, to make sure that we're really designing research best practices that leverage technology in a way that do give us better, faster, cheaper insights.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're great tools out there. Anybody else want to weigh in? Anybody else using? I know, Andy, you mentioned you're using a DIY tool as well. Anybody want to weigh in on that? Go ahead, Will.
Right, just a little. I mean, we would actually pay more for good sample. I mean, if there was truly a definition of what is good sample, now, we still have to go out and 3-bid everything, just like any large company does. But very few primary research companies are sort of bringing forward, and maybe it's because they're either embarrassed by it or just not unconfident, bringing forward their sample quality and saying, pick us because we know how to get really good sample. Instead it's just kind of a hidden pass-through cost. It's a pass-through cost, and it's you're going to get what we go get from the panels. But if someone came to me and said, look, we're going to have to charge you 20% more, but we guarantee this sample is a lot better than what bidder number 2's got, I'd make that payment, just because when you're in a company like Ford, which really needs to kind of recycle a lot of things, we reuse the data set a lot, and I'll pay for it. I'll pay well for it once and reuse it 6 or 7 times.
Right. Okay. Well, that's great to hear.
I think unfortunately the people on the phone and listening in to this conversation are probably the minority in the research industry. And, if IIeX wasn't virtual, we'd all be sitting in Austin listening to presentation after presentation on agile AI, machine learning methods that are going to get you results and answers faster and cheaper. And to be honest, I don't think really many people are talking about the quality and your, how do you get 2 or all 3 out of 3 things you're asking for?
Yeah, yeah, maybe not, but we should. I mean, and I think that the technology, I'm the moderator, but in terms of there's a lot of technology solutions that are out there that do allow, I think, for the speed and the efficiencies as well as the quality. And I think you're right. I mean, I'm sure there are a lot of sessions that are centered around that as well that we haven't listened to at this stage. Charles, any thoughts on the pricing from your perspective?
I agree with Will's comments that we absolutely would pay for quality, and I can never think of a situation where we ever knowingly compromised on quality for a lower price.
Great. Okay. The time has gone way too fast here. So we've talked about a lot of different things, and I think that definitely front and center is the fact that there are data quality issues. You guys are willing to pay more. There's some great technology tools that are available to help. What should the industry? We've talked a little bit about CASE. What should the industry do? How can we rally to improve the situation? And Michael, I have a quote from you because we've been on a panel together. Quote from you actually, but 2 years ago you said it's pathetic that we can't measure our own quality. So I'm just going to throw it out to you first. What would you like to see the industry do to improve data quality?
Yeah, that's funny. I'm sure in context it was a brilliant statement at the time.
It was.
but I do think that, as an industry that, it's something that we need to be taking a little bit more seriously because, I think that there's one big problem. I think people don't really realize or understand how poor some of the data quality is that they're getting. And I do think even for, everybody who's listening into this call, even, basically, saying something, like being part of case or, even sending, like Mary Beth, Bonnie, you guys a note and just saying like, hey, we, totally agree that this is an important issue and we, how can we help? Because I do think as an industry, we need to set up and start, really making sure that we have the right standards in place, that we have, the right assessment protocols in place, like all the things that CASE has really been working on, and really making sure that, that the industry is kind of lined up against, making sure that we're, willing to help, guide the industry and, support companies that are doing good quality research. So, that's why I do think that, being on this panel is important. I think that CASE is important. And I think as an industry, we really need to up our game in the same way that I think you started to see, like, the media industry, who, I think that there it was much more obvious to, media companies that they were being ripped off. Or advertisers, right? And you've seen a lot of, efforts, I think, put in place to try to, prevent that degree of fraud. I think we need something similar here. We might not be talking about billions of dollars worth of advertising, but we are probably talking about billions of dollars worth of bad decisions. So I do think it's important.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the decision making is, it all rides on it, right? So, Kelly, I see you. Are we getting?
Yeah, we have 2 minutes left, guys. We do have a bunch of questions in the chat. And maybe you could address some of those, or you can catch up with people individually.
I appreciate all of your support. First of all, for CASE, as does Mary Beth, and we are trying to move forward on data quality. So, Mary Beth is our contact, our membership committee, and we invite, while brands are really our stakeholders and driving, we're accountable to all of you. We invite the industry, the whole research supply chain, to participate, and we will open it up to questions.
Yes. So I thought this was an interesting one. And we don't have much time to answer anyway. But on the programmatic sampling companies. Do they improve the quality of the panels, with their heavy investment in technology and their ability to be able to see this survey takers longitudinally across surveys? What has been your experience with that?
Who wants to take that? Programmatic sampling. I can't take it.
Is anyone using the programmatic sampling? Any of you have experience?
Michael, go ahead. You look like you.
I can comment on it, sure. I think one of the things that I would say is, I do feel like, ultimately, yes, those companies you can look across different sample types to, kind of to some degree, like assess various sample, and they do some of that as well on their end. But at the same token, all they're doing is really aggregating. So it's not like they're personally like doing anything, to improve sample quality. So, yes, it might show, it might help you identify which sampling companies are better than other ones. But in regards to like ultimately whether they're dramatically improving kind of the state of sampling quality, I don't really think so. I think that, the companies, like Disco, who, or, companies that are really, I think, looking more specifically at like sample quality and trying to identify and build panels that have that type of quality, putting in, kind of the right type of screening devices, et cetera. Like, I think that's going to make a much bigger difference ultimately. Yeah.
Thanks, Michael.
One other question, data collection, because I know we're at the end. Data collection partners are always being pressed for cheaper sample. Do you acknowledge the correlation between data quality and the requirement of cheaper sample?
Well, yeah, anybody want to raise their hand on that one? Go ahead, Will.
Ultimately, that's every industry in the world. You can buy a really cheap car and you can buy a $200,000 car. you get what you pay for at the end of the day. If you continue to press for lower and lower prices, you have to expect the quality that you get.
Yeah. And do you feel like there are choices out there that you can differentiate between the less expensive or the cheaper versus the higher quality?
I mean, I feel like the sample industry is kind of turned themselves into a bit of a victim on this and just kind of said, well, you guys won't pay for it, you won't pay for it. And so everybody's gone cheap. And everybody's then, uses the fallback of, well, you didn't pay me enough money, so I didn't get you a good sample. And, there's really been there have not been companies to differentiate themselves and sort of be the premium, the Lincoln of sample.
I would like to interject there that the other thing too is that there's no measurements right now for data quality. And that's really what put CASE in existence, because buyers are always going to default to price and time because those are objective. You can measure it. But right now with quality, every vendor out there is purporting to have the same data quality processes in place. So when everybody's saying the same thing and you have no way to measure it, you're going to go for the cheapest, fastest version. Anyone want to comment on that?
I think we're getting cut off as we did last time.
I think a lot of people are heading to the next session. As much as I hate to say it,
I don't think I've ever had a proposal who actually sample, and that's why we may not be winning on the price.
Yeah. Dana, can people submit their questions and we can respond to them afterwards?
Yes. If they submit questions through the chat, if you want to stay a few minutes to submit your question, we'll share the chat transcript. There were a number of questions that we didn't get to, but they will have the opportunity to answer and to respond directly. So thank you, everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks to all of you.